Rome, 39 AD, the Palatine Hill. It is not a home. It is a processing plant. The marble floors are cold enough to freeze the blood in your feet, but the air is stifling, thick with the scent of roasted peacock, heavy perfume, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. We are in the dining hall of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, the man history remembers as Caligula. But forget the monster for a second. Look at the room. Look at the silence. 300 of Rome's most powerful men, senators, generals, consul, are eating. But they are not tasting the food. They are listening. They are waiting for the sound of sandals on a mosaic. When the emperor enters, he doesn't scream. He smiles. And that smile is the most terrifying weapon in the ancient world. He walks behind the couches where the senators recline with their wives. He isn't looking at the men. He's inspecting the women, like livestock, like inventory. He stops behind a woman named Livia. He lifts her chin. He examines her profile. He checks her teeth. The room stops breathing. This is the first atrocity. Not the act itself, but the terror that precedes it. The reduction of a human being to a biological asset. He nods to a Praetorian guard. The guard taps Livia on the shoulder. She stands up. She doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She knows the protocol. She follows the emperor out of the room. The husband, a man who commands legions, looks down at his plate. He cuts his meat. He chews. He swallows. Because if he stops eating, if he shows a flicker of agony, he dies. What happened next in that adjacent room was one of history's most buried secrets. It wasn't passion. It was a demonstration. When Caligula returned, wiping his hands, he detailed the encounter to the husband in front of the entire Senate. He critiqued her performance. This wasn't chaos. It was policy. It was the calculated dismantling of the Roman soul. This video contains explicit discussion of sexual violence, psychological torture, and the killing of children. If you're not in a good place for that, please stop watching now. This isn't pure myth. This isn't a script from a Hollywood horror movie. This comes from the records of Suetonius and Cassius Dio historians who, admittedly, had every reason to hate the emperor. But beneath their gossip lies a skeletal structure of truth supported by the psychological profile of a man given absolute, unchecked dominion over the known world. Hit the like button if you've ever wondered where the line between history and horror blurs. We are diving deep into the machinery of the Roman Empire to understand how a boy named Little Boots became a sexual predator of industrial proportions. We have to understand the mechanism. The empire wasn't just a collection of provinces. It was a machine designed to funnel wealth, slaves, and bodies to the center. And at that center sat one man. Caligula didn't just break the laws of sexual morality. He industrialized their violation. He realized something that no emperor before him had dared to vocalize. If you own the world, consent is a myth. To Caligula, every citizen, from the lowest slave to the highest patrician, was property. The atrocities we are about to list were not merely acts of lust. They were acts of governance. They were designed to humiliate the aristocracy, to break the will of the Senate, and to prove that the emperor was not a man, but a living god who existed above the petty constraints of human decency. The air in Rome in 39 AD didn't smell of incense. It smelled of iron and fear. To understand the atrocities, we must first understand the machine. The imperial palace was a labyrinth of bureaucracy. We often think of Caligula's reign as a chaotic party, a free-for-all of madness. That is a mistake. It was highly organized. There were schedules. There were lists. There were procurators whose sole job was to procure bodies. When we talk about the sexual atrocities, we are talking about a system that required infrastructure. Rooms had to be prepared. Guards had to be stationed to drown out screams. Scribes had to be present to record the lineage of the victims. Why? Because Caligula was obsessed with bloodlines. He wanted to pollute the purest families in Rome. It was a strategic contamination. By violating the wives and daughters of the Senate, he was making them unmarriageable, unpolitical, unpowerful. He was severing the alliances that held the Republic's remnants together. The visual landscape of this machine was stark: marble, gold, and blood. It was a cold, hard world where softness was punished. The corridors of the palace were long, echoing chambers where the footsteps of the Praetorian Guard served as the ticking clock of a ticking time bomb. Every person who entered that palace knew they were entering a predatory organism. They were the nutrients. Caligula was the stomach. Let us focus on the micro. Let us look at a specific victim. History often forgets their names, merging them into a faceless mass of victims. But let's reconstruct one. Let's call her Drusilla, not the sister, but a composite of the noblewomen dragged into this nightmare. She is 20 years old. She is married to a rising star in the legal courts. She has a child. She has a fear of thunderstorms. She has a life. And then the invitation arrives. It is not a request. It is a summons. The wax seal of the emperor is not a mark of honor. It is a target reticle. The preparation for the event is a ritual of terror. She must be bathed. She must be oiled. She must be dressed in her finest silks, silks that cost more than a legionnaire earns in a lifetime. But as her servants dress her, their hands are shaking. They know. She knows. The husband knows. They stand in the atrium of their home, adjusting togas, fixing hair, performing the pantomime of a happy couple going to a royal dinner. But look at their eyes. The pupils are dilated. The breathing is shallow. They are walking to their own execution, but they must smile while doing it. This is the targeted dehumanization phase. The system requires them to be complicit in their own abuse. If she refuses to go, her husband is executed for treason. If she goes and weeps, she insults the emperor. The only path is submission. Complete, total, robotic submission. The journey to the Palatine Hill is a procession of the damned. The litter moves through the streets of Rome, carried by slaves who look at the ground. The crowds part. They know where that litter is going. There is a hush in the streets. The Roman mob, usually so loud, so raucous, falls silent. They are witnessing a sacrifice. This is the second atrocity, the public complicity. The entire city becomes an audience to the rape of its own nobility. Caligula wanted this. He wanted the streets to know. He wanted the rumor mill to churn. It amplified his power. When the litter arrives at the palace gates, the guards check the names against a list. A scroll. A bureaucratic document. This is the banality of evil that Hannah Arendt would write about 2,000 years later. It wasn't a monster at the gate. It was a clerk. A clerk with a stylus, checking off a name, ensuring the inventory had arrived. The heavy bronze doors open. The sound of the latch clicking shut is the sound of a prison cell closing. Inside, the air is different. It is warmer, sweet, sickeningly sweet. Incense burns to cover the smell of excess. The sensory details are overwhelming. The walls are painted with scenes of mythological rape Jupiter and Io, Apollo and Daphne. The art itself is a threat. It tells the guest, the gods take what they want. And I am a god. The preparation continues inside. The guests are separated. Men to the triclinium, the dining hall. Women to the waiting rooms. We don't often hear about these rooms. Ancient sources gloss over the logistics, but they existed. Holding cells draped in velvet. Here, the women wait. They can hear the laughter from the dining hall. They can hear Caligula's high-pitched manic voice. Every burst of laughter is a spike of adrenaline. They are not people here. They are courses in a meal. The psychological toll of this waiting is incalculable. It breaks the spirit before the body is ever touched. This was Caligula's genius. He didn't just want to use their bodies. He wanted to extinguish their personhood. He wanted them to feel like objects. And by the time the guard came to retrieve them, they were. They were hollow shells, vacated by their own souls in a desperate attempt to survive the trauma that was coming. This was the infrastructure of the atrocity, the calculated erosion of the self. Atrocity number 3, the imperial brothel. This is perhaps the most striking example of the machine concept. According to Suetonius, Caligula didn't just assault women. He capitalized on it. He set up a fully functioning brothel within the imperial palace. But the workers were not slaves or common prostitutes. They were the wives and sons of the Senate. He forced them to stand in cubicles, like common streetwalkers. He sent criers into the forum to invite the public commoners, soldiers, freedmen to come to the palace and enjoy the hospitality of the emperor. This was the ultimate inversion of Roman order. The sanctity of the Roman matron was the bedrock of their society. Caligula turned that bedrock into a marketplace. He charged admission. He kept ledgers. He taxed the rape of his own aristocracy. Imagine the scene. The marble halls of the Caesars lined with small, makeshift partitioned rooms. Aristocratic women, weeping, forced to solicit passers-by while Praetorian guards stood watch. Swords drawn, ensuring the transaction was completed. It wasn't just cruelty. It was commerce. It was a way to replenish the treasury that Caligula had drained with his lavish building projects. He was selling the dignity of Rome to pay for his own golden statues. The micro-horror of the brothel is unbearable. A young man, a son of a consul, forced to service a centurion while his father watches from the banquet table. The shame was the weapon. In Roman culture, sexual penetration was deeply tied to status. To be the active partner was to be powerful. To be the passive partner was to be servile. By forcing the high-born men and women into passive roles with low-born customers, Caligula was physically rewriting the social hierarchy. He was saying, your lineage means nothing. Your titles mean nothing. Only I determine your worth. And the twist? The Roman people, the mob, they participated. They lined up. This reveals a dark truth about the human condition. When the system sanctions atrocity, when authority invites barbarism, the veneer of civilization cracks instantly. The citizens of Rome didn't revolt against this brothel. They became its customers. They bought tickets. They became part of the machine. Caligula proved that the people were just as monstrous as he was. They just lacked the power to show it until he gave them permission. The descent into this madness wasn't improvised. It was infrastructure. The scribes recorded the earnings. The tax on flesh. This is where the historical nuance is vital. Did every single senator's wife end up here? Likely not. The historians Suetonius and Dio were writing decades later, and they were writing for a new dynasty that wanted to make Caligula look as bad as possible. But even if we discount 50% of the stories as exaggeration, the core truth remains. Caligula used sexual humiliation as a fiscal policy. He monetized terror. The brothel wasn't just a place of sex. It was a theater of dominance. It was a physical manifestation of his belief that he owned everyone. And for those who refused, for the women who fought back, the details are scarce, but the implication is clear. The palace had basements. It had sewers. The machine had a waste disposal system for broken parts. The silence of the archives regarding the resistors is the loudest scream of all. Atrocity number 4, the theft of the bride. We move from the brothel to the altar. The story of Gaius Calpurnius Piso and his bride, Livia Orestilla. It was their wedding day, the most sacred day in a Roman life. The ceremony was underway. The guests were gathered. And then the emperor arrived. He didn't bring a gift. He brought a mandate. He looked at Orestilla. He decided he wanted her. Not tomorrow. Now. He ordered the groom Piso to dissolve the marriage on the spot. He commanded the priest to marry her to him, Caligula, instead. Right there, in front of the stunned guests. Imagine the silence in that room. The groom, powerless, watching the emperor take the hand of the woman he loves. It wasn't a seduction. It was a confiscation. Caligula treated the bride like a piece of land he was annexing. He took her to the palace, consummated the marriage, and then, this is the twist, he divorced her a few days later. But he added a decree. She was forbidden from ever having sex with another man again, including her original husband. He didn't just want her. He wanted to ensure no one else could ever have her. He placed her in a state of permanent, enforced chastity, a living ghost. It was a pettiness so vast it became a monument. Then there was Lollia Paulina. Caligula heard a rumor that her grandmother had been beautiful. Based solely on this genetic speculation, he summoned her from the province where she was married to a governor. He forced her to divorce her husband. He married her. He grew bored of her. He divorced her. And again, the machine engaged. He passed a law forbidding her from remarrying. This wasn't passion. It was a collection. Caligula was collecting women like stamps. But the atrocity here goes beyond the sexual. It is the destruction of the private sphere. In Rome, the family, the asterisk paterfamilias asterisk, was sacred. The state stopped at the front door. Caligula kicked the door down. He showed that there was no private life. There was no sanctuary. If the emperor wanted your wife, your daughter, or your husband, they were his. This shattered the psychological safety of the entire empire. No one could plan for the future. No one could build a life. Because the machine could arrive at any moment and repossess your happiness. The human twist in this narrative comes from the quiet dignity of the victims. We have no record of Aristilla screaming or fighting. Why? Because to fight was to doom her family. Her submission was an act of heroism. She allowed herself to be consumed by the machine to save the man she loved from execution. It is a tragic silent sacrifice that history rarely honors. We focus on Caligula's madness, but we should focus on Aristilla's resolve. She walked into the beast's den with her head high. In the face of absolute chaotic power, the only rebellion available was the preservation of one's internal dignity. She survived him. She outlived the monster. And in the end, that is the only victory available to the prey. To endure until the predator dies. Atrocity number 5. The incestuous divinity. We cannot tell the story of Caligula without facing the darkest rumor of all. Drusilla, his sister. The historians whisper that he treated her as his lawful wife. That he was caught in bed with her by his grandmother when they were mere teenagers. Whether the physical act happened is debated by modern scholars. It may have been slander to paint him as a tyrant. But the political incest was undeniable. And in many ways, that was worse. He elevated her to the status of a goddess. Panthea, the universal goddess. He forced the Senate to worship his sister. When she died, he declared a period of public mourning so severe that laughing, bathing, or dining with one's family was a capital offense punishable by death. He made the entire empire hostage to his grief. This is where the sexual atrocity becomes a theological one. He was trying to breed a new race of gods. He believed that the Ptolemies of Egypt practiced incest to keep the bloodline pure, so he would too. He viewed his DNA as too precious to mix with mere mortals. It was narcissism elevated to a biological imperative. The machine of the empire had to bend to this madness. Temples were built. Statues were carved. Priests were ordained to worship a dead girl who was the sister of a madman. Imagine the psychological state of the senator who has to offer incense to Drusilla, knowing the rumors, knowing the perversion, but forced to act as if it is holy. It is a breaking of the mind. This is gaslighting on a civilizational scale. Caligula was forcing reality to bend to his delusions. He was saying, what is true is what I say is true. What is moral is what I do. This is the ultimate definition of tyranny. It is not just controlling the bodies of the subjects, but controlling their perception of reality. If he says his sister is a goddess, she is a goddess. If he says he is Jupiter, he is Jupiter. The sexual taboo of incest was just another boundary he had to cross to prove he was above human law. If he followed the rules of men, he was just a man. By breaking the ultimate taboo, he proved to himself, at least, that he was something else. But let's look at the micro, the tragedy of Drusilla herself. Was she a victim or a partner? History is silent on her voice. She died young, likely of fever, perhaps pregnant with a child of incest. If the rumors were true, she was trapped in a cycle of abuse from childhood, groomed by a brother who was also her king. She had no escape. Her body was the vessel for his god complex. When she died, Caligula fled Rome. He ran to the wilderness. He grew his hair and bared a sign of madness in a Roman aristocrat. He wandered the edges of the empire, howling at the moon. It was the only time the machine stopped. For a moment, the gears ground to a halt because the operator was broken. It shows us that beneath the cruelty, there was a profound, screaming emptiness. He tried to fill it with sex, with violence, with gold, but the hole in his soul was bottomless. Atrocity number 6, the nanny ships. In the 1920s, Mussolini drained Lake Nemi to recover 2 massive ships. These were not warships. They were floating palaces, pleasure barges. The archaeology confirms the madness. Mosaic floors, heated plumbing, jeweled decorations. And according to the texts, these were the sites of Caligula's most extreme indulgences. He would hold parties that lasted for days. The ships were designed for one purpose: to create a world where the laws of Rome did not apply. On the water, he was truly untouchable. Suetonius describes scenes of unnatural vice. Boys trained to swim between the ships like fish. Orgies that mixed food, sex, and violence into a single indistinguishable slurry. This was the industrialized hedonism. He built a machine on the water to facilitate his fantasies. The engineering required to build these ships was staggering. The best minds of Rome, the architects who built aqueducts and temples, were forced to design floating brothels. It was a misuse of human potential that defines the era. The atmosphere on these ships was one of suggestive horror. Imagine the sound of water lapping against the hull, mixed with the screams and laughter from the deck. The isolation was key. Once you were on the ship, you couldn't leave. You were trapped in the Emperor's reality. He would allegedly dress as Venus or Bacchus, blurring the lines between gender and divinity. He would force his guests to participate in tableau vivant events, living scenes from mythology that often involved real violence or real sex. It was performance art where the actors were hostages. The machine here was the ship itself, a contained ecosystem of depravity. The archaeological find of the Nemi ships provided the physical proof. Gold rings, bronze wolf heads, intricate plumbing valves stamped with his name. These weren't myths. These were real places where real people suffered. The wood has rotted away, but the metal remains, testifying to the weight of the sins committed on those decks. But the twist is the silence of the lake. Lake Nemi is known as Diana's Mirror, a sacred place. Caligula defiled a holy site with his excesses. This was his war against the gods. He was challenging Diana, the goddess of chastity, in her own home. It was a theological rape. He was screaming at the heavens, daring lightning to strike him. And when it didn't, when the sky stayed silent, he took it as proof of his own supremacy. This theological arrogance was the engine of his sexual violence. If the gods won't stop me, who are you to resist? The Nemi ships represent the peak of his hubris. Floating islands of sin in a sacred lake, drifting aimlessly, steered only by the whims of a madman. Atrocity number 7. The sexual humiliation of the assassin. This is the atrocity that killed him. It brings us to the final twist. The man who killed Caligula was Cassius Scheria, a tribune of the Praetorian Guard, a war hero, an old soldier. But Caligula didn't see a soldier. He saw a toy. For years, Caligula taunted Sharia. He called him Venus. He mocked his voice. He made him give watchwords that were sexually explicit or effeminate. Every day, when Sharia came to ask for the password, Caligula would whisper obscenity. Priapus. Venus. He would make hand gestures, inviting the soldier to kiss his ring in a suggestive manner. This was sexual harassment weaponized as political dominance. He was emasculating the very man charged with protecting his life. It was a psychological game. Caligula believed he was so far above humanity that he could spit in the face of a man with a sword and suffer no consequences. But the machine malfunctioned. The gears ground against each other. Caligula forgot that a soldier is not a slave. Sharia took the insults. He absorbed the shame. And he converted it into rage. This wasn't a political assassination. It was a personal reclamation of dignity. The sexual atrocity backfired. On January 24th, 41 AD, in a tunnel beneath the palace, the bill came due. Sharia didn't just kill him. He butchered him. The first blow fell. Caligula screamed, "I am still alive." A last desperate attempt to assert his divinity. But the swords kept falling. 30 times. The sexual predator was unmade by the masculinity he had mocked. The irony is perfect and terrible. The man who used sex as a weapon was destroyed by a man he sexually ridiculed. The system ate itself. The aftermath was immediate. The Praetorian Guard rampaged. They killed Caligula's wife, Caesonia. They killed his infant daughter, dashing her against a wall to ensure the bad blood ended. The machine, in its panic, destroyed everything connected to the operator. It was a purge. The Senate tried to restore the Republic, but it was too late. The machine was too big. They found Claudius hiding behind a curtain and made him emperor. The system reset, but the scar remained. Caligula had shown the world the dark heart of absolute power. He had shown that if you give a man the world, he will try to fuck it, break it, and eat it. And the world will let him for a while. We jump to the present day. Excavations on the Palatine Hill. We find traces of the pigments, the foundations, the coins. We hold a coin with Caligula's face. He looks young, normal. It's chilling. How does a human face hide such an abyss? The sexual atrocities of Caligula are not just history. They are a warning. They are a case study in what happens when accountability dissolves. When a leader is surrounded by yes-men, when institutions fail to check power, when the whim of one becomes the law of all. The machine of Rome allowed Caligula to happen. The Senate, the army, the people, they were the gears that ground the victims. Caligula was the driver, but they were the engine. We like to think of him as a monster, an anomaly, but he was a product of his system. Philosophy, civilization versus. Barbarism is not measured by aqueducts or roads. It is measured by how we treat the powerless. It is measured by consent. Caligula represents the anti-civilization, the triumph of the ID over the superego. His reign was a 4-year nightmare where the worst impulses of humanity were given an unlimited budget. He reminds us that the veneer of society is thin, that the machine can always be repurposed for cruelty if we are not vigilant. The screams from the Palatine Hill have faded, but the echo remains in every abuse of power we see today, in every moment where a powerful figure treats a subordinate as an object. The ghost of Caligula is not in the ruins. It is in the headlines. Return to the victims, to Livia, to Orestilla, to the unnamed son of the senator in the brothel. We tell this story not to glorify the villain, but to witness the victims, to acknowledge that they existed, that they felt pain, that they were real. History tried to bury them under the weight of Caligula's legend, making them mere props in his story. But they were the story. Their endurance is the story. If this deep dive into the darkest corners of Rome unsettled you, if it made you look at power differently, then we have done our job. Uncomfortable truths matter. They are the only things that keep the monsters at bay. Subscribe for more excavations of the human soul. I'm Noctis History, and this is the history they tried to burn.